The UK budget is just around the corner, and this week the Chancellor has been working hard to soften the blow of a likely income tax rise. If that happens, the consensus among experts is the hike for the rest of the UK will result in a cut to the flow of money coming to Scotland. Economists think that figure could be around £1 billion. So the question is, what could the Scottish Government do to plug the gap? I spoke a little earlier with the Finance Secretary Shona Robison and asked her if she understood why people might be worried.
Well, I do. I feel anxious about it because it is a classic example of Westminster governments making decisions that could potentially impact on Scotland without us having any ability to influence them, which is why, of course, I'm asking for an urgent meeting with the Chancellor to make sure she understands the risks to Scotland, because we want to see a budget that invests so that we can see economic growth and also helps people with the cost of living crisis, because we know people are struggling with their household bills, and we need a budget that's going to address that, not one that could potentially cut funding for Scotland.
The issue of tax can be quite confusing, so it's great that we have you here. You can maybe help us, because those who earn over 30k, just over 30k here in Scotland, already pay more tax than the rest of the UK. So if Rachel Reeves increases income tax, that doesn't necessarily affect us. But if she couples that with a cut in national insurance contributions, won't people here in Scotland be better off?
Well, look, firstly, a majority of taxpayers in Scotland do pay less than they would elsewhere in the UK, and it's important to say that, but we have asked those with the broadest shoulders here in Scotland to pay a bit more, which of course has helped to fund public services, with £1.7 billion being raised for that purpose. But you're right to point to the interaction here between income tax and national insurance. And the fiscal framework, when it was developed, which really is the mechanism for offsetting funding through the block grant adjustment, was never designed in a way that was going to see UK governments use income tax and national insurance interchangeably. That was never envisaged. So, for example, income tax is accounted for through the fiscal framework, but national insurance is not accounted for through the fiscal framework. And that is a problem for Scotland's finances. And what we need to see is either them not proceeding in this way and recognising the problem, or to include national insurance as part of the fiscal framework. So if there was a cut to national insurance, we would see the benefit of that. So this is uncharted territory here, and it is not one that the fiscal framework ever envisaged.
Yeah, so this leaves you in something of a pickle, because if Rachel Reeves does this, some people in Scotland might be better off, but you might be facing a £1 billion hole in your budget.
Well, that is potentially a worst case scenario, for that very reason that any money raised from income tax, for example, if it was invested in public services, we would receive consequential funding for that. So there could be a bit of a balancing there. But if at the same time she cuts national insurance contributions, then that will reduce the money to the Treasury. And of course, that's not recognised or accounted for as part of the fiscal framework. And therefore, it would reduce Scotland's funding, because there's less money going to the Treasury, so less consequentials. So that is the kind of nightmare situation for Scotland, and of course that's not one that we want to see, and that is why we need that engagement, because I can't believe a UK Labour government would want to actively cut Scotland's funding by £1 billion. That would be an extraordinary set of circumstances.
But do you appreciate that Rachel Reeves has a difficult situation? She needs to save somewhere between 20 and 30 billion, and has admitted she's got to make difficult choices. She's breaking manifesto promises, so you might have to as well.
Well, she is breaking manifesto promises, and they're doing that right, left and centre. But of course, these are self-imposed fiscal rules. She could change her self-imposed fiscal rules, whether that's on the day-to-day borrowing or on the debt rules that she has imposed upon herself.
Anyone listening to this who runs a family budget or has a business will be thinking, right, well, if I knew there was a big financial hit coming, I'd start to make some plans. So what are your plans if you are facing a £1 billion black hole?
Well, I don't want to face that scenario,
but
which is why
you might
I am
have to.
desperately seeking urgent engagement. Well, I would hope that the Chancellor is not going to put Scotland in that position, but of course we are scenario planning here for every eventuality and looking at what the options may be. We have already invested a lot of money in helping family budgets through the Scottish Child Payment, helping to put food on the tables of families every single day. We've invested in housing, to invest in infrastructure, and of course, our council tax bills are lower here in Scotland. So we are helping with family budgets, but this, £1 billion
£1 is a lot of money.
Such a magnitude that it can't just be magicked away.
Well, exactly.
Yes,
so what is the plan then? Are you going to raise income tax?
Well, look, I'm not going to set out here today what our plans for income tax are when we don't know what we're going to face on the 26th of November.
But we have a rough idea. We have a rough idea of what might happen. So what are your options? One is to increase income tax and one's to cut.
Well, essentially, if we end up in this scenario, then the levers available to us are very limited unless there is flexibility given through the fiscal framework, which would be my first ask, that we need to have that flexibility, because we don't want to raise taxes. Of course, we had already set out in the tax strategy that we wanted to see that stability till the end of the Parliament. But in the event of unforeseen exceptional circumstances, clearly we would have to potentially revisit that. So we are looking at all of the scenarios, all of the options here, but you'll appreciate, the Chancellor has options that could avoid this scenario. I cannot believe that a Labour Chancellor would want to cut Scotland's funding by £1 billion. That, to me, would be extraordinary, and Labour would pay a very high price for that here in Scotland.
We enjoy a lot of universal benefits in Scotland that the rest of the UK don't. Is it perhaps time to start looking at some of those to make savings?
Well, we have invested in the social contract here in Scotland, which means that students don't have to pay tuition fees. That means that young people can go to university without that threat of debt hanging over their head.
That costs about 900 million a year. 900 million.
Not a tax.
900 million a year for university fees.
It's an investment in our young people and in our future, in the same way as we don't want to tax people who are sick through prescription charges. So these are investments in the social contract. We ask people who earn a bit more to pay a bit more, but we also give them the benefit of that social contract. So there's a social contract with the people here in Scotland that I think has ensured that we invest in our young people, invest in our services, and of course make sure that those who are the most vulnerable and need that extra help, they also get that extra help through mechanisms like the Scottish Child Payment, which has been a very, very important investment.
Is there not a scenario, though, that you could still help the most vulnerable, but those who might benefit from a cut in national insurance, you say, OK, you pay for your kids' school lunches, you pay for your prescriptions and you pay for your university fees?
No, I don't believe that would be the right way to proceed. These are supports that have been important investments here in Scotland that we very much treasure and are part of that social contract.
We might treasure them, but can we afford them? Can we afford them?
Well, we can afford, yes, we can afford them and have afforded them because we've balanced our budget every single year. The threat here doesn't come from decisions that we're making. This threat comes from a potential decision that a UK Labour government might make, one which our fiscal framework arrangements were never envisaged. They did not think that a government would, for example, use income tax and national insurance as interchangeable. That was never envisaged when the fiscal framework was developed.
So if you agree to the fiscal framework,
they have to recognise that.
Didn't you agree to the fiscal framework?
Yes, but it was never envisaged that a government, yes, we did, but it was never envisaged that a government would use income tax and national insurance interchangeably. That was never envisaged. So if they're going to do that, national insurance has to be accounted for through the fiscal framework. It is not at the moment, but it could be. That is a change that Rachel Reeves could make that could make this problem go away, because then if there was a cut to national insurance, that would be recognised through the fiscal framework and Scotland would be reimbursed for that. So, these are really serious issues and the Chancellor needs to recognise that this could be an impact, and there are options available to her to avoid that being the case.
Yeah. In June, John Swinney said the UK government should raise income tax. So she's doing that.
Well, the raising of income tax per se for public services is not a bad thing. We have done that in order to invest in our public services. In of its own, if she was to raise income tax and then invest that money in public services, Scotland would get consequential funding from that, and that would balance out the issues that we're talking about by and large. If, though, she then reduces national insurance, that drives the coach and horses through that investment, because there'd be less money for the Treasury, and national insurance is not accounted for in the fiscal framework. So we would get no benefit through the fiscal framework of that cut to national insurance.
Taxpayers would get a benefit.
That is the issue here.
Workers would get a benefit, though.
Well,
Workers in Scotland would get a benefit.
But then if they see their public services cut, they lose that benefit through a reduction in public services through a cut from Westminster. So, we think there is a way through this that is a sensible set of arrangements that recognises this was never envisaged. And if Rachel Reeves wants to include national insurance as part of the fiscal framework, we would welcome that, because then that would be accounted for. If there is a cut in national insurance, we would get the benefit from that, and that would help us to sustain the investment in public services.
What's your relationship like with Rachel Reeves? I mean, do you have sympathy for the situation she's in? You both have to deliver budgets. Sometimes that involves making really difficult, unpopular calls. I mean, what's your relationship like? Can you call her up and have a discussion about this?
Well, I've had a few meetings with her. Most of my engagement is with the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, but I think on this occasion it has to be a meeting with the Chancellor herself, because she's the one making the decisions. Look, on a personal level, I do have some sympathy. It is an incredibly difficult job, but she has boxed herself in here with her self-imposed fiscal rules. She gave herself a wafer-thin level of protection through the headroom. It was tiny, and any movement was going to completely sweep that away, and that of course is what has happened. So she has created a lot of this problem for herself, and of course the Labour government is all over the place, and it's very hard to predict what they're going to do because of the chaos that they're presiding over. So yeah, on a personal level I have sympathy, but a lot of this has been created by herself and the government that she's a part of.
OK. Shona Robison, thank you very much indeed for joining us on The Sunday Show.
Thank you.
And that is all from me this week. Thank you very much indeed for your company. There's much more available online and on BBC Sounds. But for now, from everyone on the team, thank you very much for joining us, and do enjoy the rest of your weekend. Bye-bye.